Hello everyone, my name is Eddie Bolen. I'm the pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I'm also the pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this message. This is an Easter sermon that I'm offering to you. Largely it comes from the Gospel according to John chapter 20, and what I'd like to do is I want to share a couple of those verses with you. This is going to be John chapter 20, and this is where Mary is meeting Jesus in the tomb. And so we're just going to get right into the middle of it. But this is John chapter 20, and starting at verse 16. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned around to him in Hebrew and said, Rabboni, which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. And again, that's John chapter 20 is where those words come from. This is, in fact, Mary's second visit. It's her second time coming into the tomb and seeing Jesus in the midst of that tomb. I do want to invite you, if you are considering being a part of a worship time and a worship gathering on Easter Sunday, that we are meeting for in-person worship in the sanctuary at both Edgewater and Midway United Methodist Church. At Edgewater United Methodist Church, we meet at 9:20 a.m. and at Midway United Methodist Church, we meet at 10:45 a.m. That is in the sanctuary. There is singing. There is gathering together. You will notice some safety precautions that we're taking just to make sure in this pandemic season to make sure that we are still doing everything we can to keep everyone safe and healthy. There is extensive cleaning that is taking place. Common surfaces are wiped down regularly, as well as just some different things that we can do to eliminate, as many common touch surfaces as possible. You'll notice that offering plates are not passed around. You'll also, if you are considering being a part of either one of those worship services, you are required to just take a chance. Just check your own self, your own body. Make sure that you have not had a fever recently. Make sure that you're not currently sick. Also know that you'll be required to wear face masks the entire time that you're around the church. That includes outside and inside. You'll also be required to maintain at least 6 feet of social distance between the people that you do not live in the same household with. 6 to 10 feet. 10 feet is a really good rule to follow, but you are invited. Again, worship on Easter, 9:20 a.m. at Edgewater United Methodist Church, 10:45 a.m. at Midway United Methodist Church. Well, the story of Mary meeting Jesus in the tomb on Easter, on the day that Jesus rose from the dead, it should be no surprise at all. If you're a little bit familiar with the Easter story, it should be no surprise to hear that women were the very first people. They were the first ones to witness the resurrection of Jesus. They went to the tomb, as John describes it. John will describe this in John chapter 20, early on the first day of the week, and they went to the tomb to prepare Jesus' body for burial. Now, John does something else. John captures a unique picture of Jesus when he is in the midst of resurrection. And he does this through the eyes of one person, Mary Magdalene. And it was not her first visit to the tomb on Easter morning. It was, in fact, her second visit. And looking into the tomb a second time, Mary sees Jesus in the very midst of resurrection. And what we get from Mary Magdalene is a picture of Jesus that asks for our undivided attention, seeing definitely what we have never seen before. Now, John's story reminds me of an old story that I heard of an elementary school teacher who was leading an art class, and it was filled with 6-year-olds. So you can just imagine teaching art to a group in a classroom that is filled with 6-year-olds. And in the back, there was this one little girl in particular, and she stood out because most of the time, she really did not pay much attention to what was happening in school. She was, like I said, back of the class and never really paid much attention. But today, on this day, she was paying a lot of attention. Today, for more than 20 minutes, she was sitting with her arms folded around her paper, with all of her art supplies, and they were just moving around feverishly. She had her arms around, she had her head buried down around her paper, totally absorbed in the paper that was right in front of her, and her teacher noticed it. Her teacher from the front of the classroom, she began to notice this. And she watched her, and in fact, for a few minutes, she was transfixed by this girl's energy and her attention to detail. And finally, her teacher, she came and she broke in. And she asked the little girl, she said, "What are you drawing? What is it that you're drawing? What is it that you're working on?" The little girl never looked up. She kept her arms folded around her paper. She kept her hands. She says, "Oh, I'm drawing a picture of God. That's what I'm doing. I'm drawing a picture of God." And surprised, the teacher said to her, "But you know what? Nobody really knows what God looks like." And the little girl said, "Well, they will in a minute." And I love that story. I particularly love that story on Easter. And as I read it alongside John's gospel story, because do you know what Jesus looked like in the midst of resurrection? In this moment of life after death, do you know how looking with Mary a second time in the tomb, do you know how that has the possibility to change your life? Do you know how that picture of Jesus in the midst of resurrection, how it has the possibility to change your life? Well, John says, you know what? You will know in a minute. You see, Jesus in the midst of the resurrection, and just think about that. Just think about what that means, that in resurrection, that is in life after death. This is the kind of picture that becomes bestsellers for people who, and even people that are complete strangers, it becomes bestsellers for people who no one else has ever heard of. And you know them. You've heard about them. Maybe you've read them before, but you know those stories about near-death experiences. I mean, those stories about near-death experiences, they shoot to the top of the bestsellers list. And then after they spend some time at the top of the bestsellers list, what happens next? They're made into a movie. And you've probably heard stories like this before. You've probably heard there's some common elements that comes in those near-death experience stories, that there was a bright light, there was greetings with distant relatives, a vision of floating over your own body. I had a member of one of my churches, one of the churches that I was serving in, I had a member that as a child would describe one of these near-death experiences, and he described it. He said, you know, I knew this. I could see my own self. I could see my own body. I could see my body. It was from a hospital. He said, I was sick. I could see my body in that hospital bed as I rose to the ceiling of the hospital room that I was in. Then I could see further. I could see myself as I went from past the ceiling. Then I was above the roof. I was able to look down. I could see the entire hospital. He said that I began to see bright lights. He said I began to see these distant relatives that I'd never seen before. And he said, let me tell you. He said that experience completely changed my life. It made me who I am today. This is the reason that I began to follow Jesus through this time. And so it was just this extraordinary near-death experience that just completely changed his life. And like I said, even stories of complete strangers, we love to hear those stories. We read about those stories. We make movies about those stories. But John says, he says, if you have seen the empty tomb for the very first time, if you're looking into that tomb where Jesus had been laid after his own death on the cross, or maybe if you've seen it hundreds or thousands of times, maybe you've studied it, maybe you have read all the accounts about Jesus in the tomb, but John says, look one more time. And that's what I want to invite you to do. That wherever you are, no matter what your experience has been, whether this is the first time you're hearing about it or it's the 100th time that you're hearing about it, look one more time. For Mary Magdalene, for at least one person, for Mary Magdalene, the second look into an empty tomb made all the difference. You see, Mary Magdalene, as Luke reminds us, Luke's a gospel writer. Luke is a writer that tells us the story of Jesus' life in the New Testament. But in the Gospel of Luke, at Luke chapter 8, verse 3, and the New Testament writer Luke says this. He offers us this picture of Mary Magdalene, says this is one whose 7 demons have been released from her. And as she comes to that empty tomb, this one who had demons released from her own body, the second look into the tomb, she begins to see 2 angels who were sitting Well, they're sitting there. They're sitting at the very place where Jesus' body had been laid after his death. The two ask her, well, why are you weeping? And she says, well, they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. John 20, verse 13. And she turns around and she shields her face away from those angels as she begins to cry, only to see Jesus standing there yet. And you know what this feels like. You've experienced pain and you've experienced grief before. You know what it's like to be this way. But in her grief and in her pain, she doesn't immediately recognize that it is Jesus. And Jesus asks her, woman, why are you weeping? You may hear those words. They may start ringing in your ears. Say, hey, that's what she's already been asked. But it says, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for? Supposing him to be the gardener, not all that unusual, the gardener, the attendant of the tomb that was responsible for managing the grounds around the tomb. Often there were gardens that were placed around these tombs as bodies were laid. It was just gardens that as people came to pay their respects to these tombs, that they would be met with these beautiful gardens. And the attendant, the gardener that was there, and she pleads, she says, sir, if you are the gardener, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take his body, I will take him away. And then Jesus calls her by name, Mary. He calls her very own name, and that's it, that does it. To hear her own name, it cuts through all the pain, the tears, and she suddenly turns around, certainly wanting to wrap her arms around Jesus and embrace him in this long overdue hug. But Jesus says, he stops her in the middle, do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. That's John chapter 20, verse 17. And are you able to see this? Are you able to picture this? Are you able to see Jesus this morning? Can you see Jesus in the midst of resurrection as he is speaking to Mary? Do you believe that God has led you to this place right now, to look a second time into the tomb, to see Jesus who is standing with Mary in the midst of resurrection, reminding her not to cling to me, don't hold on to me right now? In other words, as Jesus is saying, God is still working. The tomb, it's not empty yet. The angels, Jesus in the midst of resurrection, to hold on to me now, to cling to Jesus now, that would be to get stuck in this tomb. It would mean interrupting everything that God has set into motion on this Easter Sunday. Can you see Jesus like that? Well, this is why. This is exactly why it is so vital for us to look a second time into the empty tomb. To see Jesus in the midst of resurrection, because it's really easy to grow comfortable with Jesus. It is even easy for all of us to grow comfortable with crosses, with tombs, with Easter, with resurrections, with all of this. Yet, we know this because we feel it. We know that as we grow comfortable with this story, as we grow comfortable with crosses and tombs and Easter and resurrections, that our hearts and souls, they yearn for so much more. You see, when we let go and when we lessen our grip, we just release it just a little bit, our grip on everything that we know about Jesus, whether we are coming to the tomb for the first time or for our 50th time, it's hard for us to do that. When we see Jesus, not the gardener, not the angels, but when we see Jesus and we get that feeling deep down in our stomachs. Maybe you're feeling it right now, but when we get that feeling deep down in our stomachs, when we begin to question ourselves, begin to sort of look inside our own hearts and look inside our own souls, when we have that brush with Jesus that makes our palms start to sweat, when we start to feel those small drops and those beads of perspiration on our lower back, when our lips right under our nose, when we start to get that small bead of sweat that comes on top of our lips, maybe we take a deeper breath and we get to that moment where we feel that Jesus is close to us, and we wonder, is anybody else noticing? Is anybody else picking up on this? Is this what other people feel? And we begin to get that sense that Jesus is real, that Jesus is with me right here and right now. We want to go and we want to grab onto that and make sure that it is real. Make sure that it is Jesus and hold on to it as tight as we possibly can. I know that's the way I always feel. When I feel that Jesus is right there where I can touch Jesus, I want to hold on to that moment. If you read all of John chapter 20, I only offered a few verses of it, just in our encounter. But if you read John chapter 20, if you read the whole narrative, if you read it without stopping, if you read it as Jesus tells Mary, do not hold on to me, if you read it together as a whole story, it seems that likely the reason that Jesus says, do not hold on to me, is because Mary has already fallen into his arms. I mean, you know the hugs that come in the midst of pain. You know the hugs that come in the midst of grief. And imagine Mary, who has been called out of her own pain, out of her own grief. And Jesus says, Mary, and she says, teacher, rabbi. She just falls into his arms. And probably, most likely, that's why you're watching this video. Because that is exactly what you want to do, is that you want to get closer and closer to Jesus, so close that you can begin to fall into Jesus' arms, because in the midst of falling into Jesus' arms, there is so much security, there is so much comfort, there is so much safety that is there, and it's what initially moves us. To move us to what is safe and to move us to what is comfortable, and that is what God blesses. God blesses that longing to hold on to Jesus, to hold on and not let go. It's in fact why we have this story in John. It is why Jesus, in the very midst of resurrection, ascending into heaven, into the kingdom of God, in the midst of that experience, that Jesus comes and finds Mary in the tomb. The tomb. The very place of death, of atrophy, of decay. But Jesus seeks Mary and says, this is it. In the midst of life after death, in the midst of ascension, in the midst of returning to the Father, Jesus finds Mary. And then he says, but do not hold on to me, Mary, because something else is happening. Do not hold on to me in this tomb, because resurrection is happening. That longing for something more that's in your heart and in your soul this morning, you're not wrong. You are not wrong at all. There is something that goes beyond our own safety and our own comfort with Jesus. There is something that our hearts and our souls are longing for right now and right here and in this moment. And in the midst of resurrection, this is where God confronts us and says and reminds us that we are people who are created in God's very own image for something more. We are created not for the safety and comfort that Jesus is able to give us and to provide us, but we are created for so much more. Our souls, our hearts long for it, and yours long for it on this very day. You were not meant to hold on to Jesus in the tomb. Let me say that again. You are not on this Easter Sunday to hold on to Jesus and to hold on to Jesus in the tomb. You are meant, in fact, you are created by God. You are meant to open your heart and your soul to Jesus, who is here today, who is coming to you in the very midst of the resurrection. Jesus, who is offering a new life to you, a brand new life to you, offering to you more than an ordinary Easter Sunday morning. That is what Jesus, in the midst of resurrection, is offering you today. You see, to experience it, how do we get there? And you may be wondering, how is it possible for me to have that experience? I see what happens with Mary. I see that Mary comes out of the experience that she has inside the tomb with Jesus, and she says to those who were not in the tomb, she says, I have seen the Lord. So how do we get there? Well, to experience Jesus in the midst of resurrection, it means letting go. It means letting go of Jesus who is in the tomb, and letting your heart and your soul take full reign. It is scary. It means letting your heart and your soul move beyond the comfort that maybe you're longing for this day, but to move beyond the comfort of Jesus who was settled, Jesus who you have always known, Jesus who was in the tomb, and letting your full heart, your full soul, take full reign in embracing Jesus for who Jesus will be in your life and not who Jesus has been in your life. You see, the resurrection is for every single one of us today. Whether we are coming to the tomb for the very first time or we are coming to the tomb for the 50th time. You see, thanks to a woman who is named Mary Magdalene, the one who had 7 demons who were released from her, we are able to meet Jesus in the midst of resurrection. Jesus, in the midst of resurrection, confronts us in our own attempts to hold on too tight to what we have always known, to what we have always done, to what we have always had with Jesus before we came to this particular Easter Sunday. You see, Jesus in the midst of resurrection on this video and for you, Jesus in the midst of the resurrection meets you exactly where you are and says to let go of everything that you have known about Jesus. To let go of the tomb that you have been with Jesus. To let go of that place where you have had Jesus in your life. To let go of who Jesus has been in your life. And to embrace what God is doing right now. To embrace who Jesus is going to be in your life. You see, that is the promise of Jesus in the midst of resurrection. Yeah, Jesus will come to you in your comfort. Jesus will come to you in your safety. Jesus will come to you even in places where new life never exists. The place of death and atrophy, the place of decay that is an empty tomb. But thanks be to God that that is not where Jesus meets us on this Sunday. You see, on this Easter Sunday where Jesus is meeting us, is in the midst of resurrection. In the midst of resurrection, the power of resurrection on this Easter Sunday says Jesus is not just comforting you in who Jesus has always been in your life. No, Jesus in the midst of resurrection is calling for more. Your heart and your soul know it. Maybe your body is starting to feel it just a little bit. But do not hold on to who Jesus has been in your life. No, meet Jesus in the midst of resurrection for who Jesus is going to be in your life. You see, that's what new life means. That's what the resurrection means on this Easter Sunday for you. And I pray that you will embrace not who Jesus has been, but embrace who Jesus will be for you and in your life. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this Easter sermon, for watching this Easter message. I pray that it will be a blessing to you. I pray that you will take that step, that you will begin to ask Jesus, who will you be for me? Not who have you been for me? And as you take that next step, I certainly pray that the Holy Spirit will surround you and that you will be embraced, by all that God is wanting to offer you this day. Thanks so much for watching. I pray that you have a blessed and a happy and safe Easter. May God's blessings be with all of you. Amen.